Have you ever experienced a situation that seemed simple and suddenly turned into a real chaos? Imagine the scene. Someone breaks into an isolated barn in Texas, thinking that it would be easy to steal some tools, without imagining that hidden there in the ceiling there is something that would change everything. It sounds like a movie scene, but this story really happened, and what happened next will surprise you. Who would have dared to open the wooden door of an old barn without imagining that inside a giant swarm of marimbondos would be waiting silently? And what could happen when this intruder unknowingly butts heads with a hive of enraged faggots who react in an instant? The answer is frightening and at the same time fascinating. Have you ever wondered what nature can do when it is provoked? This Texas episode shows that sometimes punishment comes in unexpected ways, almost like a lesson the environment itself tries to teach. The speed with which the marimbondos attack is breathtaking. In seconds, the invader finds himself surrounded by an angry swarm, which does not hesitate to show its strength and protect its home. The fear, the pain of the stings, and the desperate escape are details that make this story even more impactful. Stay with me until the end, because what you will discover now may surprise you and change your perception of what is really dangerous in isolated places in the Texas countryside. This narrative, which seems straight out of a thriller, reveals that sometimes the real threat is not in the hand of the thief but in the uncontrollable force of nature. And the most curious thing is that this episode has become a local legend, a kind of silent warning that when it comes to protecting what is yours, nature does not play in service. The story of the barn and the swarm of marimbondos quickly spread throughout the small town, turning into a kind of popular teaching. Be careful when messing with what is not yours, especially when nature itself decides to defend itself. And from now on, you will understand how this episode unfolded and why the barn eventually got such a peculiar name, the Keeper of the Marimbondos. But first, let's explore the details of this unexpected invasion, which shows that sometimes punishment comes in a totally unpredictable and wild way. If you were curious about the outcome of this story, or if you have already experienced a similar situation of surprise and fear, leave your comment below. Share your experience, opinion, or feeling about what happened to this thief, and how the force of nature often surprises us in unexpected ways. Your participation is essential for this channel to continue growing and bringing stories that make us reflect and connect with each other. Liking the video also helps spread that message by showing that this type of content matters and makes a difference to you. And if you like stories that mix suspense, reflection, and a little humor, subscribe to the channel. This way, you stay on top of all the new videos, helping to broaden this community that likes to learn from real and surprising stories. Your presence here is what makes this channel exist and reach more people with this type of content. So be sure to participate, because every comment, every like, and every subscription reinforces the power of this network to share stories that show us how powerful and unpredictable nature can be. Stay with me, because there's still a lot of interesting stuff out there, and this Texas story is just the beginning of a series of episodes that will hold you back and make you think about what really happens when you least expect it. It was a silent night in the Texas countryside, where the sky stretched out endlessly, punctuated by stars that seemed to watch over every movement in that quiet vastness. The light breeze blew between the fields, bringing an almost sacred whisper that seemed to echo through the empty fields, carrying with it the heavy silence of a loneliness that only those who know the vastness of the interior can understand. The barn, set back from the main road, hid in that gloom like a silent guardian of tools and work equipment that lay there, forgotten and protected by walls of aged wood. For the farmer, this was just another day of routine, a night of rest after long journeys and hard work under the scorching sun. The silence was sometimes comforting, a break from the daily rush, an opportunity to breathe and reflect on day-to-day decisions, on dreams of a simpler life, but full of challenges. However, for someone looking for an opportunity to act in the dead of night, that silence becomes a kind of disguised invitation. The thief, who walked with cautious steps, knew that this was the perfect moment. The hope of finding valuable tools, of taking something that would be easy and quick to transport, motivated him to approach the barn with a mixture of anxiety and determination. His idea was simple: open the door, grab what he could, and disappear into the darkness. He had planned everything to the smallest detail, believing that surveillance there was minimal. that no one would be around to prevent his action. And in his mind, it seemed like a golden opportunity, a chance to get rich quick without any apparent risks. But what he did not imagine was that in that seemingly ordinary barn was hidden something much more dangerous than any metal or wooden tool. The entrance to the barn was marked by an even deeper silence, a tension that seemed to envelop the environment, as if the space itself was waiting for the right moment to reveal its secrets. Putting his hand on the wooden handle, the invader felt a feeling of cold and slight restlessness, as if an invisible force was there, watching his every movement. With a careful pull, the door creaked slowly, revealing the dark interior, where moonlight filtered shyly through the cracks. It was at that moment that tragedy began to unfold, in a way that no one could have predicted. As he opened the door, he knocked on exactly what seemed to be an invisible structure, a natural protection that nature itself had created there, a nest of marimbondos, giant and menacing, hidden in the roof of the barn. What happened next was quick, almost instantaneous. The marimbondos, awakened by the sudden sound, came out of hiding with a blind fury, forming a cloud of stings that spread throughout the environment. The invader, taken by surprise, tried to retreat, but the barrage of stings surrounded him on all sides. The sharp pain of the stings and the growing fear turned his escape attempt into a desperate race, an escape that soon turned into a struggle for survival. Every step out of the barn seemed a momentary victory, but the chase continued, down to the road, where his presence became visible to anyone who was watching. The cry of pain and despair echoed through the silent night, a sound that seemed to mix fear, the physical impact of the stings, and the feeling of helplessness in the face of a force he had no way to control. That night would mark local history in an unusual way. The farmer, upon hearing the screams and noise echoing through the property, immediately called the police. When the officers arrived, they found the invader lying on the road covered with stings, almost without the strength to move. The story soon spread, becoming something of an urban legend, a warning that nature, though silent and seemingly peaceful, can be a ruthless force when provoked. The story of the barn has become symbolic of a lesson that many in the small town have come to know, a story of natural punishment, of a punishment that came in the form of an angry swarm, a demonstration that the very essence of the environment that surrounds us has an intelligence and a strength that we should not underestimate. Since then, the barn has come to be known as the Marimbondos Keeper, a constant reminder that sometimes nature acts in ways far beyond our comprehension, guarding its secrets with an intensity that defies any human logic. And this story, marked by an episode of pure unpredictability, reveals that deep down our entire journey of decisions often depends on how we perceive and respect the limits of the natural world around us. The night remained silent, almost as if Texas itself was holding its breath, waiting for the right moment to reveal its most unpredictable side. The thief, confident in his cunning, advanced slowly across the dirt terrain with gentle and carefully calculated steps. His eyes scanned the environment, looking for signs of any movement or sound that might betray his presence. The darkness was his ally, an invisible curtain that hindered any attempt at recognition or the possible arrival of someone who could thwart his plan. The sense of control, though tenuous, fueled his false security, as if he were the only master of that space, someone who mastered the situation without having to make much effort. He knew that the barn looked abandoned, forgotten by time, and he believed that because it was isolated, no one would be there to interfere. Then, with firm steps, he approached the wooden door, which creaked slightly when touched, as if he was also aware of what was going to happen. The surrounding environment seemed to conspire in his favor, reinforcing the illusion that everything would happen without obstacles. With steady hands, he grabbed a makeshift crowbar, a simple but sufficient tool to force entry. His mind filled with quick thoughts: what he would catch, how long it would take, whether he would be able to escape before anyone noticed his presence. He believed that his strategy was perfect, that night of absolute silence would give him the upper hand. The feeling of being in control, of manipulating the moment, fueled his confidence, making him believe that nothing could go wrong. He positioned himself carefully, taking a deep breath to remain calm, while his hand held the makeshift object firmly, prepared to open the door with a decisive movement. Each movement seemed rehearsed, almost mechanical, as if nature itself was helping to hide its presence, collaborating with its illusion of invincibility. But what he didn't realize was that the environment, no matter how quiet it seemed, held secrets that could change everything in an instant. His certainty that nothing threatened him was based on the illusion that control would be absolute, a posture that actually made him vulnerable. The door, as it opened slowly under the effort of the crowbar, revealed something he could never have imagined: a hidden space, a structure that seemed not to be part of the ordinary setting of a barn. On the roof, almost invisible in the darkness, a giant nest of marimbondos hid like a natural trap, a defense that nature itself had created to protect its territory. Every second that passed from the moment he put his hand on the doorknob was fraught with a false sense of security, of an illusion that he had absolute control. But at that moment, the true face of that environment began to show itself. The peace that seemed to prevail was abruptly broken by a barely perceptible movement. The marimbondos, awakened by the sound of the door being forced, began to leave the hiding place, forming a dark and threatening mass on the ceiling. The first, which broke loose, was like a warning signal for the entire swarm. In a matter of seconds, a cloud of angry marimbondos burst from the ceiling, forming a curtain of threats that seemed to envelop the invader in a deadly trap. The thief, who still had hope that everything could work out, felt his heart speed up as the first stings were felt, a sharp pain that pierced his skin and his psychological at the same time. The illusion of control turned into a desperate fight for survival as he tried to retreat, but the barrage of stings surrounded him on all sides. His attempt to escape became an almost instinctive movement, a desperate race against time, against the very nature that, at that moment, showed its brutal and indomitable strength. Each step away from the barn felt like a momentary victory, but the swarm followed relentless, like a force of life itself manifesting without warning. The cry of pain and fear echoed in the night, mixing with the muffled sound of stings. He tried to protect himself with his hands, but the pain was too intense to bear. His body, covered in stings, began to weaken, while his mind struggled to comprehend what had happened. The scene seemed to come out of a nightmare, a sequence of quick, instinctive and desperate actions, until finally he fell to the side of the road, exhausted, covered in stings and completely overwhelmed by the impact of that brutal attack of nature. When the police arrived, they found the man there slumped almost like a victim of a natural punishment, a punishment that came without warning and without mercy. The story soon spread in the city, becoming a kind of urban legend, a narrative that reinforced the idea that, when you least expect it, nature itself decides to give its answer, often in a way that no one can predict or control. And then, while the dust settles and silence reigns again in those lands, the barn remains there silent, like a silent guardian of its secrets, now with a name that echoes in the collective memory, the guardian of the marimbondos. But the impact of that night goes far beyond the simple story of a thief and a menacing hive. It's a lesson about decisions, about how our false sense of control can be destroyed in a matter of seconds, revealing a hidden truth we often ignore. Because no matter how hard we try to dominate the environment, nature always finds a way to protect itself, to show its strength, to remind us that deep down we are only a small part of a much larger universe, full of mysteries, dangers and revelations that only become evident when we are in the line of fire. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter. At the exact moment when the invader's hand approached the barn door, the wood, already aged by time, began to creak loudly, as if protesting against the invasion. It was a sharp, almost cutting sound that echoed through the silent night, adding to the tension of the moment. Each snap felt like a silent warning, an attempt by the structure to warn of what was to come, a kind of ancestral warning that something big and dangerous was about to happen. The invader, concentrating on his task, did not notice what was coming. For him, this was a simple action, a move that would be part of a routine of cheap theft without consequences. But in fact, that sound of creaking wood would be the harbinger of a tragedy that would change everything in a matter of seconds. And then came the bang. The door, being forced hard, could not withstand the pressure, and a loud noise, almost like a silent explosion, announced what he had struck. At the same instant, a structure hidden in the roof of the barn was hit hard, and what came next was a reaction that no one could predict. The invader, surprised, found himself surrounded by a dark, threatening cloud, a mass of angry marimbondos who rushed out of hiding at a frightening speed. It was a flood of insects that, when awakened from their forced rest, did not think twice before attacking. The impact was immediate, a barrage of stings that spread throughout the body of the man, who tried to retreat, but pain and panic overwhelmed him. At that moment, the hidden truth of that barn was brutally revealed. What seemed like a simple and quick action had become a death trap, an instantaneous transformation that put in check any illusion of control he might have. The strength of the marimbondos was so overwhelming that in a few seconds their invasion strategy turned into a desperate struggle for survival. Each sting felt like a direct punishment of nature itself, a physical and psychological impact that would leave deep marks not only on the skin but also on the mind of that man. His desperate race for the exit turned into a battle against pain, against fear, against the very unpredictability of that moment. The chaos was almost cinematic. The cloud of marimbondos pursued the invader, who desperately tried to dodge the bites, while the pain increased exponentially. His vision blurred from the impact of the stings as his body began to weaken, unable to resist the incessant attack. Every step outside the barn felt like a temporary victory, an attempt to escape from that living nightmare. But the insects continued to relentlessly pursue him, as if they knew exactly where he would be. The cry of pain and despair filled the night, mixing with the muffled sound of the stings that spread through the body and soul. The scene was one of quiet violence, a demonstration of the uncontrollable force of a savage environment that for a moment proved ruthless and just in its punishment. When he finally fell, exhausted, covered with stings and unable to continue, silence reigned again, now fraught with even greater tension. The night that until then seemed calm had become a reminder that nature, although often silent, is a force that does not allow itself to be provoked without consequences. This instantaneous transformation, this turning point, is what reveals the true essence of the impact of that episode. It was not only a thwarted invasion, but a brutal lesson that in the journey of understanding the world, often what seems simple becomes a revelation of a hidden truth, that the force of nature is a force that is not measured, is not underestimated, and that, when provoked, reacts ruthlessly, changing everything in an instant. And as the attacker tried to catch his breath, the scene remained scarred by the brutality of that attack. The strength of the marimbondos, the creaking wood, the silence that seemed to weigh more than ever, all contributed to a feeling that, in that instant, the universe had decided to show its truest face. And it is precisely at this moment, of chaos and impact, that many questions begin to arise. Because no matter how hard we try to plan, control, or predict, the hidden truth that life is unpredictable, full of twists and unexpected lessons, reveals itself more clearly than ever. What happened there in that instant is a perfect example of how our actions, no matter how minor they may seem, can trigger consequences that change everything from one hour to the next. The story of that man, covered in stings, becomes a metaphor for a journey of transformation, where impulsive decisions can open doors to revelations that, often, we would prefer not to face. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because this story serves as a mirror for many situations in our lives. Often we act in a hurry, believing that we have control over everything, without realizing that there is a greater force, a hidden truth that is always there, waiting for the right moment to show its strength. And this force, which can be nature itself, the universe, or even our own actions, always responds proportionally to what we provoke. Just like the invader, we are often faced with situations that seem small, but which carry in themselves a huge impact load, capable of transforming everything around us. And it is precisely at this point that our mentality needs to evolve, to understand that our decisions have weight, consequences, and that often what seems to be a simple action can trigger a reaction that goes far beyond what we imagine. Because deep down, this history of Texas is a lesson in humility, in respect for the environment, the universe, and the forces that surround us. And by understanding this connection, we can learn to act more cautiously, with more emotional intelligence, knowing that the impact of a decision can reverberate throughout our journey, changing the course of everything we thought was safe or controllable. He said, "That makes sense to me." The silence of the night was abruptly interrupted by a deafening sound, like muffled thunder echoing through the darkness. It was the intense hum of hundreds of angry marimbondos, a force of nature awakened in a violent and ruthless way. The swarm came out of the barn ceiling with a blind fury, buzzing loudly, forming a menacing curtain that seemed to envelop everything around. Each marimbondo fell in a free fall, like a storm of stings that spread in a chaotic and devastating way. The first wave of bites hit the invader's face before he could even understand what was happening. His eyes widened, and a sharp, excruciating pain shot across his face as dozens of insects piled up on his head, neck and arms, forming a cloud of stings that seemed to have no end. He tried to protect himself, desperately raising his hands, but the amount of marimbondos was so great that every attempt at defense seemed futile. Stings cut through his skin, leaving red, burning marks that spread everywhere. The scream of pain and dread came out of his throat at an almost animal frequency, as if he was being consumed by an invisible fire. His movements became uncoordinated, a mixture of panic and suffering that made him lose track of direction. He dropped the tools on the floor, forgetting any plans to steal the tools there, while his mind desperately tried to understand what had gone wrong. The speed of the attack was frightening. The marimbondos, moved by a protective force that nature itself created, did not give rest. Each sting was a cruel reminder of his vulnerability to an environment he had tried to exploit, but now proved ruthless. The man, overcome by despair, began to run, staggering in the direction of the nearest road in an attempt to escape from that flood of pain and fear. Their screams echoed in the night, mingling with the incessant buzzing of angry insects. His steps were clumsy, almost a dance of survival, as he tried to ward off the marimbondos who insisted on clinging to his skin. Each movement of flight seemed a battle against life itself, a race against an invisible enemy who had decided to punish his arrogance. The persecution was intense. The marimbondos, as a collective force, continued to attack him until, exhausted, he fell on the road, unable to continue. Pain, fatigue, and shock gripped his body as he tried unsuccessfully to get rid of the stings. The scream that escaped his mouth was one of pure agony, a mixture of fear, pain, and a cruel realization that nature, though silent, is a force that cannot be underestimated. When the police arrived, they found him lying there, completely covered in stings, almost unrecognizable. The impact of that attack was so profound that it became a landmark episode in local history, a reminder that when we provoke nature, it responds ruthlessly, leaving an indelible mark on the memory of those who witness its power. That night became something of a milestone, a hard lesson about the consequences of our impulsive actions. The invader, who believed he was in control, was taken by surprise by a force he could not foresee. The story of that attack became a narrative that is repeated in the mouths of many, reinforcing the idea that the true strength of life lies in unpredictability and the ability to protect what is yours, often in ways that we do not even imagine. The barn episode, with its swarm of marimbondos, serves as a reminder that there are invisible boundaries to be respected, and that arrogance or haste can turn a seemingly simple action into a lesson in brutal humility. Because deep down, this whole story reveals a hidden truth, that true transformation happens when we understand the impact of our decisions and learn to respect the forces that shape our universe. Now, I want to go even deeper into this matter, because this force that manifests in that moment of chaos is also present in our daily journey. Every decision we make, every step we take, carries a load of impact that we often cannot see at the time, but that itself, sooner or later, reveals itself. This story of the marimbondos, for example, is a powerful metaphor for how our arrogance, our haste, or even our ignorance can trigger reactions that change everything around us. And in fact, what draws attention in these revelations is the connection between what we do and what happens to us afterwards. Because many times, what seems like a small action ends up becoming a great lesson, an opportunity for transformation that reveals us the behind the scenes of the universe, showing that everything is interconnected by an invisible network of causes and effects. When we reflect on this episode, we realize that the true strength of nature and also of life lies in its unpredictability. That man did not imagine that a simple invasion of the barn could trigger such a violent attack, so just in its response. And that is the greatest revelation, that the impact of our attitudes is often greater than we can imagine, and that our journey is filled with signs, with reactions that come from a deeper place. Sometimes we must learn to listen to these signals, understand that there are invisible limits to be respected, and that our evolution depends on how we manage to connect with the forces that surround us. And this connection in turn reveals a hidden truth that many only realize when they are already in the midst of chaos. That true transformation happens when we learn to balance respect for the life force with the courage to move forward. Aware that everything has a price, he said, "That makes sense to me." The hour of escape turned into a real struggle against an invisible force that seemed to multiply every second. The invader, already covered in stings, desperately tried to escape from the swarm that seemed not to be satiated, as if each marimbondo was a small sentinel driven by a new energy, a force that only nature itself can generate. His steps, initially coordinated, became clumsy, almost like a panic dance as the stings multiplied and the pain spread throughout his body. Every movement was an attempt to find a refuge, a safe place, but the flood of angry insects surrounded him on all sides. The feeling of helplessness mixed with fear, creating a combination that accelerated his steps even more, in a desperate race against his own pain. The sound of the incessant humming of the marimbondos filled the air, a loud, almost deafening hum that seemed to accompany every beat of that man's racing heart. Their cries of pain spread across the field, echoing in the silent vastness, awakening the animals that slept peacefully and frightening the neighbors who, from their homes, began to notice the confusion that was being set there. It was a chaotic scene, a kind of silent war, where each sting not only hurt the body but also eroded the hope of an easy escape. Each step towards the road was an attempt to escape from that nightmare, while the pain intensified with each sting. The feeling that all this was a natural punishment, an inevitable consequence of an impulsive action, became clearer every moment. The persecution seemed to have no end. The marimbondos, as an organized force, continued to follow the invader with a determination that seemed superhuman. He, more and more tired, tried to keep himself on his feet, but the pain and panic made him stagger, almost as if he were being pulled by a force greater than himself. Her screams became increasingly desperate, laden with a mixture of physical pain and fear, of not being able to escape that relentless onslaught. Each sting felt like a cruel reminder that nature itself had its way of protecting itself, of showing its strength, of making it clear that certain limits cannot be crossed without paying a heavy price. With each step, he felt that the ground trembled under the incessant humming, as if the whole earth was vibrating to the sound of that chaos that he himself had caused. As he tried to pull away, his vision began to blur, and each movement became more difficult. The pain turned into a kind of weight that pulled his strength down, making it even more difficult to try to escape. His cries for help were drowned out by the sound of the swarm, who insisted on following his every move, as if determined to make sure he didn't escape without a lesson. With each passing second, the feeling that everything could end there definitively became stronger. The race, initially fast and coordinated, turned into a struggle of resistance, a battle against an invisible enemy that proved stronger and more ruthless than any weapon or strategy he could imagine. In the end, the body could no longer resist. The exhaustion added to the stings made him fall to his knees, almost as if he had been overcome by an enemy he could not see. Their screams mingled with the hum of the marimbondos, forming a symphony of pain and despair. The night, which once seemed calm, now carried the weight of a silent defeat, a harsh lesson that the force of nature is relentless and that it often responds proportionately to what we provoke. The surrounding animals went back to sleep, indifferent to the chaos that ensued there, while the man remained there covered in stings, marked by a night that took him to the limit of his physical and emotional resistance. That episode left a deep mark, not only on the skin but also on the soul, a reminder that when we challenge the limits of the natural environment, we can end up paying a price we never imagined. And as he tried to recover, the night took its course, carrying the certainty that the next decision could be even more important, because what seemed small often holds a greater revelation than we can perceive at the time. It was a silent dawn, with the sky still laden with stars that seemed silent witnesses of all that confusion. The farmer, who was sleeping peacefully in his house next to the barn, was suddenly awakened by a strange noise, a mixture of screams and hums that echoed through the property. At first he thought it was some wild animal or a sudden storm, but as soon as he opened his eyes he realized that the situation was much more surreal than anything he could imagine. Still in his dressing gown, he hurried out, and as he approached the barn he gasped when he saw what had happened. There was the thief, running in circles, his face, arms and neck covered in stings, desperately trying to get rid of that cloud of angry insects. The scene looked like something out of a comedy drama movie, Only in practice it was a real-time tragedy. The farmer's look was one of surprise, mixed with a hint of irony. How could someone want to steal tools from such an isolated place and, right there, end up becoming the victim of a natural force that, in its simplicity, was ruthless? The scene, absurd as it was, had a kind of cruel poetry, a kind of justice that nature itself invented without needing rules or laws. The thief, with his face raw, looked like a character from a story that no one would believe if anyone told it. And as he tried to recover, staggering and bending down to try to protect himself, the farmer simply picked up the phone without having to move a finger and called the police. There was no need for direct intervention, because that was already a lesson that life itself had given in a clear and definitive way. For the farmer, that situation had an ironic sweetness that did not escape the watchful eye of those who know the behind the scenes of the field well. How can a person be so reckless, so impulsive to the point that they think they could break into a secluded place and get away with it? His reaction was one of almost philosophical tranquility, as one who knows that the universe has its own ways of balancing things. That episode had become a kind of symbol of an inevitable impact, a reminder that no matter how hard we try to manipulate or plan, there are forces beyond our control that manifest at the right time, and often in a way we can't foresee. The most curious thing was to realize that even in the face of such a scene of irony, the farmer did not show an ounce of surprise or anger. On the contrary, his posture was that of someone who recognizes the impact of human decisions, who knows that sometimes an impulsive action can end up arousing a brutal reaction from those who least expect it. Most interesting of all, while the invader was still trying to recover, the farmer watched it all with the expression of one who had seen many similar stories, only never with such a literal dose of natural justice. This mixture of surprise, irony, and at the same time a sense of quiet relief reflected his mentality well. He knew that night had taught him something valuable, something you don't learn in books but in practice, in the field, in real life. That often a rash decision, or an attempt to take advantage of something that is not yours, can trigger a reaction that not only destroys the moment, but also reveals the true rules of impact and consequence. And somehow this scene of chaos and irony would become a classic episode in the history of the farm, a reminder that, in the end, nature itself always finds a way to show who is really in charge, either with wounds or with lessons that are engraved in the memory. When the police finally arrived at the scene, it was already dawn, and the scene they found had an impact that was hard to forget. The man was there, slumped by the side of the road, covered in stings, his skin red and swollen, reflecting the physical pain that still lingered. His eyes were wide, filled with fear and an anguish hard to explain as he tried to understand what had happened there, in his attempt to steal tools that in his naivety he thought might be easy to pick up. The police, accustomed to dealing with complicated situations, had to act quickly, not only to take care of the injuries, but also to understand the dimension of that episode. It was a scene that seemed to come out of a fictional story, but that in fact had a much greater force of impact than any narrative could convey. News of the episode spread quickly through the small town, like a shadow stretching across every corner of inland Texas. In the square, in the neighboring farms, and even in the local school, the case became the subject of conversation, with a mixture of disbelief and even a certain respect. After all, no one could fail to recognize the force of nature present there, a force that, in its simplicity, managed to turn an act of trespassing into a harsh lesson, almost as a deserved punishment. Since then, the barn has come to be known to everyone as the guardian of the marimbondos, an expression that eventually became a kind of symbol of protection and, at the same time, respect for the environment. The story gained space even in conversation circles among older residents who reported similar stories, where the force of nature always manifests itself in unforeseen ways, reminding us that the impact of our actions often exceeds our initial understanding. The interesting thing is that over the years, this narrative has been gaining an almost mythical dimension, a kind of warning that has crossed generations. For many, that night became a lesson that decisions, however minor they may seem, carry a weight that can reverberate in ways we couldn't imagine at the time. The whole community began to reflect on the importance of respecting the limits of the natural environment, understanding that true strength lies not in brute force or human intelligence, but in a delicate balance, which is often broken by reckless or arrogant attitudes. Thus, the episode of the thief and the marimbondos became examples of a natural transformation, a behind-the-scenes revelation of the impact our actions can have on our own journey. This impact has somehow created a deeper connection between people and their surroundings. Every time someone passed by the barn, which now bore the name The Keeper, he was reminded that the strength of a greater force lies in its ability to balance what is just and what should not be provoked. And in the collective memory, that episode became a symbol that the true revelation of a hidden truth often comes with an implacable force which chooses neither time nor place to manifest itself. When an entire community comes to know this story, it ends up strengthening in the understanding that real transformation comes from respect for the forces that surround us, conscious choices, and the humility to recognize that, no matter how hard we try to dominate the environment, there are limits that only nature itself can establish. Thus, the story of that man, who became a legend in the Texas countryside, reinforces the idea that by understanding the behind-the-scenes impact and consequence, we can learn to act more wisely on our own journey, always attentive to the revelations to come. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject because this story reveals something much greater than the simple reaction of a swarm of marimbondos. It leads us to reflect on the essence of transformation and the journey that each of us goes through throughout life. Often we are so focused on our day-to-day decisions, immediate results, or the pursuit of something we want to achieve, that we forget to look behind the scenes of these actions for the revelations they can hide now. I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this story reveals something much greater than the simple reaction of a swarm of marimbondos. It leads us to reflect on the essence of transformation and the journey that each of us goes through throughout life. Often, we are so focused on our day-to-day decisions, immediate results, or the pursuit of something we want to achieve, that we forget to look behind the scenes of these actions for the revelations they can hide. The impact. The impact of a choice, however insignificant it may seem, has a force that often only manifests itself over time, when we can no longer go back. Like that barn invader who thought a routine break-in might go unnoticed, many of us also underestimate the power of our attitudes, believing that small actions won't have serious consequences. However, life often shows us, in sometimes very subtle ways, that what we provoke can generate reactions that change everything from one day to the next. The story of the man surrounded by stings is actually a metaphor for our own journey of transformation. Every impulsive decision, every unthinking attitude, is like a door that, when opened, reveals a universe of possibilities, many of them hidden in the hidden truth of our choices. These revelations can teach us that, behind the immediate impact, there is always a bigger lesson that only presents itself at the right time, when we can no longer avoid or run away from it. And the most important thing is to understand that these lessons do not just come as punishments, but as signs that something bigger is underway, an opportunity for growth that forces us to rethink our actions, our priorities, and above all, our mentality. From the moment we begin to realize that everything around us is a kind of mirror of our own journey, our way of facing difficulties also changes. The impact we make on the world is often. From the moment we begin to realize that everything around us is a kind of mirror of our own journey, our way of facing difficulties also changes. The impact we make on the world is often a direct response to our inner attitudes, our emotions, our conscious or unconscious choices. This understanding helps us develop a more open mindset, more responsible for our actions, and to understand that the universe has a way of giving back what was sown. The story of the invader, with the stings that marked him forever, serves as a reminder that true transformation only happens when we can see behind the scenes of the impact, when we learn to accept that the deepest revelations often come from situations that seem small, but that carry a huge learning load. The question is how to watch for these signs. How to watch for these signs. How to develop a more sensitive perception of the hidden revelations that life presents to us. The answer lies in cultivating a mindset of respect, humility, and courage to face our own limitations. Often, the impact we feel or cause is a warning, an opportunity to adjust course to recognize what we need to improve. These difficult experiences, such as that of the man covered in stings, show us that the greatest force is not in imposition, domination, or arrogance, but in the wisdom of understanding the limits of the environment, of recognizing our own weaknesses, and of acting more consciously. If we think about it, this story is proof that evil or pain is often a form of natural punishment, a response that If we think about it, this story is proof that evil or pain is often a form of natural punishment, a response that the universe itself prepares for anyone who tries to challenge its invisible laws. It is not a matter of destiny, but of a deeper understanding that everything we sow has the potential to germinate and grow, and that the consequences often come at the right time, not always when we expect them. This connection between action and reaction reveals that true transformation happens when we learn to reflect on our actions, to understand their impact on our lives and those of others. It is an opportunity to awaken to a broader vision, to see beyond what the eye can grasp at the time, and to realize that often the most important revelations are hidden behind the scenes of our own history. And so, by understanding that everything that happens around us carries a message and a lesson, we can begin to build a more mature mindset, more aware that the impact of our actions is not something random, but a direct reflection of what we cultivate internally. Every experience, whether painful or pleasurable, is a learning opportunity to advance our journey of growth. After all, true strength lies not in avoiding impacts, but in learning from them, in turning wounds into wisdom, and in using hidden After all, true strength lies not in avoiding impacts, but in learning from them, in turning wounds into wisdom, and in using hidden revelations to become better versions of ourselves. The more attentive we are to the signs, the easier it will be to understand the true message that the universe wants to send us, and thus build a more resilient mindset, firmer and more aligned with our essence. This is the key to turning obstacles into stepping stones, wounds into maps, and impacts into sources of wisdom. And meanwhile, the story of the barn and the marimbondos continues to show us that behind all the apparent casualness, there are secrets that only the courage to look beyond can unravel. He says, "I'm on this journey too. If you have come this far, it is because this story has touched some moment within you, either in the reflection on our actions or in the force that nature has to teach us." I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel, because here we seek to share stories and insights that, if you have come this far, it is because this story has touched some moment within you, either in the reflection on our actions or in the force that nature has to teach us. I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel, because here we seek to share stories and insights that help to see the world in a more conscious and light way. Each video is an opportunity to learn something new, to reflect on the impact of our choices, and to understand that often the best response comes from respect and humility. If this message made sense, leave a comment saying that I'm with you until the end, because this exchange helps create a stronger connection between us. Here, the goal is to share experiences and learn together in a natural and unhurried way. And if you liked the content, give it a like, because this connection that we create throughout the video makes all the difference, so that more people can also reflect on these stories.